So, what I'm going to talk to you about just now is some excavations we've done at Tarradale near Muir of Ord over the last couple of years. As I'm sure most of you will know, there's been a lot of excavation at Tarradale over the last 10 to 15 years, including a major 3-year project funded by the lottery. And that's included Mesolithic sites where there were rare antler tools revealed and a very large Pictish barrow cemetery, amongst others, multi-period sites, as you can tell. But the focus here is on something perhaps a little bit more prosaic, some post-medieval remains from the last few hundred years. So it focused on originally a site we called the Barns, but as that progressed, we also found another feature, which is this, which we are still putatively calling a kiln. So I'm going to tell you a bit more about that. Excavations between May 24 and July 25 with volunteers from NOSAS and outside NOSAS as well. So it all started with this map. So we had a 1788 estate map by Aitken, and Tarradale House is here. Originally, we were looking at this possible distillery, but unfortunately, trenches we put in there failed to locate anything. So then the focus moved on to this group of 5 buildings, which, as you can see on here, are called barns. So agricultural buildings linked with the Tarradale estate, presumably. So originally we uncovered this substantial wall, about 1.2 meters wide. It started off with just a few stones poking through, but as work went on through several long weekends in 2024, we uncovered a further length of it. You can see here the original length of wall we uncovered, some quite large field boulders set in there, several courses in some cases. And we then extended this to get this entire length of wall here. At this point, we were thinking this is one of the buildings on the barns on the map we just showed, but it soon became clear this seemed less likely as we were not finding any obvious returns coming off there, which would make a rectangular building. However, to the north of the extent of the wall we found, we did find this rubbly spread, which we then continued to investigate. Here's just a few pictures of volunteers at work in summer 2024. And you can see older archaeologists and some younger archaeologists too from the Young Archaeologists Club in Inverness. There's another junior archaeologist and some more senior ones there. And indeed, Digit promoted the digs for us back then. So there were some quite nice community digs, a lot of participants, a lot of people who've never dug before, along with more kind of seasoned veterans. So just going to quickly use these aerial pictures by David Newman just to show you the progression of the site here. Here you can see plans of what we had uncovered as of August 25. And they're in a little bit more detail. You can see there the extent of that full wall we just looked at earlier, the rubbly spread coming off it, which has extended quite a way now. This other circular feature, which is going to be the main focus of this talk. And then indeed, in between 2 log piles, we found this same wall reappearing, showing that the complete wall was extending at least from here, where there's old stables, right up to here in the north. So what appears to be a substantial freestanding wall. Another plan here, different colors showing different periods of the work we did. The magenta stuff is more recent. And here with aerial pictures added. And so throughout this time, we were trying to make the building shown on the Aitken map correspond to what we were finding on the ground. And so we were putting in different configurations. We were georeferencing these buildings, putting them onto our plans, trying to make them fit. There is what appears to be a wall there, or maybe a wall anyway, shown on the map. We were trying to make this fit in with our long wall. We in fact don't think it's shown on the map at all. And then trying to make the buildings fit. And here in 2025 is another configuration we tried very hard. We were putting in further trenches. We had a digger come in and open several trenches up speculatively, really just trying to find where the buildings might be leading. So just showing the very north of the site, top of the freestanding wall, original spread of rubble here and how that progressed. Just going to go through that quite quickly. You can see the rubbly spread coming through there. You can see this rubbly spread expanding. Then more trenches put into the north. And I'll just take you through the progression here with our circular pit and these sites to the north of our original freestanding wall. So you can see here how this developed through winter 24-25 and then into summer 25. And here we are pretty much at the final configuration here. Again, here, this is where that east-west cut is, and we did find a lot of stone in there, but unfortunately it appeared to be demolished rubble. It didn't seem to show any extant building remains. We're assuming this is demolished rubble from the barn shown on the Aitken map, but we've largely failed to positively identify the position of them, unfortunately. You can see the extent of the rubble here with this meter pole. And then over here at the other end of that east-west cut, you can see left a lot of this obvious rubble has been removed, but we have some large field boulders. We thought possibly the base of a wall, and an intriguingly long sandstone slab here that's still in the section. And we hope this might have been the base of the original wall. But even trying to extend to find the other side of the wall, rubble spread is obviously continuing, as you can see in that section there. Despite a great deal of hard work and effort by our volunteers, unfortunately, at this point, we gave up on the barns. There you can see a close-up there. Finds we found in the big freestanding wall and in the barns. We did get quite a lot of 18th century or very early 19th century remains. You can see a composite of several glass wine bottles here, probably dating to the late 1700s. And we got parts of a crystal goblet here and some creamware. These have possibly come from a dinner service from Tarradale House, we think most likely. And we also some spongeware and some dairyware here, again, similar kind of date. And a little bit older, we did get some fragments of medieval pottery, medieval redware with bits of glaze still left on them. But although at the time we were quite excited about these, there is in fact a kind of medieval background of medieval pot found all over Tarradale and the surrounding fields. So possibly not demonstrating too much in terms of the the buildings we were looking at. So to concentrate now on the surprise, really, which we weren't expecting to find, was this possible kiln. It started off with a small speculative trench to the north of that freestanding wall, and a large flat stone we found at the bottom. And we thought there was enough in that to warrant opening up that wider and just seeing what was there. Which indeed is what we did back in autumn 2024. And you can see as this is cleared up, we have quite a lot of stone in there. There's that flat stone again. And as it developed, usefully, the whole feature is surrounded by sand. So it was quite definite when we had reached the kind of extent of the feature, because it's marked by this clean sand. And extending from there, you can see now we've got the full extent of it. And this was back in, I think, July or August. Sorry, it is August 2025. You can see it's a little greened over there, but that really shows the full extent of the excavation in that site to date. So what I'm going to do is show you some more photographs on the ground, as it were, now, just to talk you through our progression there at that site and our thinking about it. So back in August 2024, this is that original small putative trench. Then there's the stone I spoke about, and we're seeing a spread of possible rubble and stone and also clay in there. The clay is important. And here we are digging down into the feature, the substantial amount of stone there becoming more apparent, and clay too. This is clay here, you can see. A lot of clay in this feature, much more than we found anywhere else on the site. And here we are beginning to extend the feature towards the east. There is that stone again. At this point, we were starting to think, do we have a kiln here? So perhaps this is a fire pit for a kiln, perhaps connected by a flue through to the feature here. And again, continuing with a group of volunteers. Here you can see we've now gone through quite a substantial amount of material. It's not obvious from the photos I've shown, but this was actually filled with a lot of stone rubble, which has been taken out. A lot of work put in to do that. And I think you can see at the bottom here we have substantial burning. We have orange, in fact, burnt clay, and also charcoal and ash. And a little less obvious with the light in this picture, but still that all those features are there. And I think you can see here we have what appears to be a nice curving back wall. So this was really the clincher in terms of the extent of this feature. Up to this point, we didn't know how far it extended towards the east. Towards the east, into that trench 10 where that long cut is, there is more stone there. We thought perhaps it linked up with here to form one long building. It does not appear to. It appears to be quite defined here. And this then led to extending the trench further to see if we can fully define it. And you can see here now that back wall is pretty much fully defined. And again, this is all clay here. This grayish yellowish stuff is in fact all clay. So a bit further work here. You can see the extent of the burning, the ash and charcoal and burnt clay at the bottom, and the full roundness of this circular stone-lined pit has been revealed. This is looking over towards that original stone we found at the top there, and we're wondering what we have there. Is this a flue? There were originally investigations to see if this was a flue leading through to the pit that we had. But as you can see here, it is in fact not a flue, but a set of stairs. We have a set of steps there, actually built out of red sandstone slabs, unlike the rest of the bowl, which is made out of field boulders, potentially making it a later feature that's been kind of added in, cut into the original bowl. And at some point, it is then being blocked with further sandstone slabs. And here you can see us now half sectioning the bottom levels of the pit with all the ash and charcoal and burning in. Here you can see the steps, the half section. Close up of the steps here, and you can see that block. Some of the finds we found up to this point. This was really in the topsoil, an agricultural chain, probably not all that old, but interesting nevertheless. A characteristic find from the rubble infill of the feature. We found lots of bone in there, lots of discarded animal bone. I think you can see marks of butchery on here quite clearly, and some large bones here. I think you can see by the scale with the trowel. We also found this piece of vitrified sandstone. I think you can see the bubbles in it here. This was right up against the wall of the feature, obviously suggests a great deal of heat going on in there to produce this vitrification. But unfortunately, at least to date, is the only piece we have found. So hard to make too much of it. We can't securely say it originates there, although that would seem to be likely. This is our one artifact that we really found in the feature proper, in the kind of secure burning layers at the bottom of the bowl. And this is a nail, unfortunately very fragmentary, as you can see, but it does have a nice square head. It is a large nail and appears to be handmade and is at least pre-1850. We were already at this point wondering about likely date. This whole circular pit feature is very deep down. It is deeper, considerably deeper, in fact, than the rubbly spread we found elsewhere on the site. And also, it doesn't seem to fit at all with the building shown on the Aiken map. At this point, we were starting to think that it actually predates everything shown on the Aiken map, as indeed we also believe that freestanding wall most likely does. We got down to a level where we're starting to see a stone hearth effectively appearing with thin slabs of stone which have cracked and indeed have cracked under intense burning. So I'm going to really talk for this last bit about how we went from here. You can see the half section, all the burning in it, through to here, where we've now removed the other half and revealed the complete floor, if you like. And finally to this, the last model from September 25, where we've done a number of further interventions, basically. So The half section, this was cutting one of the photogrammetry models in half to be able to kind of effectively get a slice right through the middle of it and to show that section. Here's a composite photograph of that section, and you can see the many layers of ash and charcoal and burnt clay in there. Obviously, repeated burning events, not just a single one, and layers of it that have been layered down. Quite a depth of this deposit was taken even before getting down to this level, but you can see even there a fair depth. And then down onto this cracked, slabby floor with larger stones in there as well to form what we believe is a kind of hearth, where there's obviously been some very intense burning. You can see here burnt clay as well, and this white deposit, which I think you can see here as well. And again, that white deposit showing very clearly here. And then the arc of this hearth, as I will call it, this fractured stone slabbing here, fractured under heat, we believe, and in fact, very friable. This was very fragile once it was actually excavated. And these larger stones, which seem to have been used to form an arc for this hearth. The thinking is this slabbing probably covered this entire area originally, but the more intense burning was in this part, and it's completely burned through. And here, just another view of the same thing, a different angle. See probably this thin stone burnt through completely here, and then these larger stones added in to create what was used as this burning surface. So we did get a few experts in to have a look at our feature. Although our instinct was this was a kiln, at least in one phase of use, there was an awful lot of debate about what it could possibly be and trying to explain what we were finding here. The lack of flue, remember we have steps here and no flue and no obvious flue anywhere else. The intense burning, the fact that we appear to have two floor layers. So we have these stones here, which appear currently to some kind of a ledge, and there are vestiges of it around the inside of the bowl, but then this lower floor here, down here in the half section. So Steve Birch, well-known archaeologist and friend of the project, came out to offer his expertise. And we also had a number of other people come and have a look. Rob McCullough came and had a look, Jonathan Wordsworth. We also had correspondence with Murray Cook and others. But so far, no one has completely come up with a hypothesis that fully explains everything we've found here to date. There's Steve again with Eric, Claire working away down in the bowl. And here we are taking out the remaining half section. See, we took lots of bulk samples, some of which have now been plotted, some of which remain for further analysis. Here's some of the early flotting that took place. We did divide the half sections into quadrants just to see if there were any kind of differences there. Some grain did come up, and we were thinking grain drying kiln. And burnt grain at that. See a closer view here, but relatively small amounts and quite small grains as well. So certainly not a slam dunk from that point of view. We did also find these apparently metallic particles, which were magnetic. which did make us wonder whether there'd been any kind of metalworking going on here. But we now think this might be a natural byproduct from the burnt clay. This is a piece of baked clay, in fact, baked so hard that it was originally thought to be stone. This came out from the flotting. And I think you can see here this imprinted mesh. Our best guess is this comes from the original superstructure to this feature. We think it likely had a dome-shaped superstructure made of turf or wicker, perhaps, and covered in clay. And wicker or something like that possibly producing an imprint like this. We think this is later slumped inwards and indeed been burnt at later stages in use. So perhaps this superstructure belonged to the first phase of use, and then the intense burning in the center of the pit in that hearth-type feature came after this had already collapsed, potentially. I said about this kind of ledge, this scarcement, if you like, these higher stones. Just a wee illustration here to just define this part and these other vestiges here. One theory is this was the original floor. And in fact, what we are seeing here in the center is later reuse, where that floor has been partially removed. And another use involving very intense burning has occurred. So this kind of cobbled floor, we think perhaps the original floor. This is showing what appears to be a collapse in the south wall. You can see the base stones are still there, but the rest of the wall isn't. As indeed I'm going to talk about now. So the bowl fully excavated here pretty much. You can see clearly all the burnt clay in there, very red, and that slabby floor. Original excavation into this collapse. You can see we've got pure sand, very close to where there was just one or two stones and a bit of soil on top removed here, and then very quickly we're down onto clean sand. And we have the base of the wall here, some clay at the bottom here. So we think only the lowest course of stones probably set in clay, and all the rest of the clay actually coming from the superstructure, as I said. Here you can see we actually removed all of this corner just to double check there was no possible flue in here. This was one thinking, rather than just collapse. Was there originally a flue coming through here or even some other feature? It appears there wasn't, as far as we can tell. At least there's no solid evidence for it anyway. And just a side view there through that section, and you can see the stone wall of the feature there, and potentially a second line of stones here. So the steps here you can see with the block in place, and we removed one of the blocks, and I think you can see now more plainly that these very much are a set of steps from this angle, and made up of what looks like multiple fragments of sandstone with big slabs to the sides. Again, set in clay. We excavated just on the outside of the steps, down the outside of the slab, just again to see if there was any kind of subsidiary feature there, and we're still looking for that mysterious flue. But again, sand. Here you can see that block removed again and the steps coming down into the feature. Over here where that collapse was, we did find this wooden post or stake, really not terribly long, as you can see from the scale. we removed it. We didn't find anything else similar around the feature, and we have no evidence that it's definitely associated with this feature. It could well be something to do with the use of this as a garden later in time. So just looking down into a little more investigation, we did into the lowest levels in the pit now. We removed part of the ledge or the higher floor, just a couple of stones out of here, just to look at the construction of that. Again, there is a base layer of clay. You can see it's been partially burnt here, and this is sand here. And in the construction of the actual walls of the pit, you can see these chocking stones essentially as part of the construction, and there is clay in there as well. And also that this intense burning, this hearth area, doesn't continue out here. That seems to be pretty much the extent of it we have there. And just looking from above, you can see again that part removed, the chocking stones, the wall, and this is with some of the slabbing now removed, these very heat affected stones removed, and you can see this halo of burnt clay and other material beneath it. Quite clear line there where it extends, and indeed round here. And here's a sondage we actually excavated into the center of the hearth, if you like, into the slabbing. This is down to clean sand. So there was actually quite a depth of material below these slabs, more burnt clay coming down onto heat affected sand. And we also have more of this mysterious white deposit. So just a quick word on that. We don't have a definite ID to it, but we were thinking, could this be lime? One possible theory for the phases of use with this feature is it started off as a grain drying kiln and was then reused as some other kind of kiln, possibly a lime kiln, and we're wondering, do we have some lime in situ here? Against that is we don't see the intense burning for the internal walls that we might expect if it was a lime kiln, and indeed there is no lime plastered on the internal walls either. We did do some analysis of the lime, some fairly basic schoolboy science really. We did some litmus tests on it, and we also tested some with some vinegar and indeed even with a blowtorch. We know it is highly alkaline. We know it perhaps tests as if it could be lime, potentially, but that's as much as we know at the moment. I'm sure there could be other interpretations. And another view above from this sondage going through this slab here, basically. And we have another wee charcoal-y feature here, which was excavated out. Not sure currently what the significance of that is. But you can see the half part extending out here to the wall in this kind of elliptical shape, basically, with this being substantially sand either side on these parts. Plans, David Newman, who did the drone views, the earlier drone views I showed, also has done some lovely plans of the feature and indeed of the whole barn site. And here, color coded, we've got various contexts. Quite a lot of work done there. A little word now on kilns, trying to make sense of this feature and what we found here. Comparing it with other known kilns, this is an example that NOSAS recently visited. That was an amateur excavation by someone who wrote into us. And this is at a place called Lowmount near Aldern. And this is quite a bog standard grain drying kiln, basically much smaller than our pit. More tapering sides and higher walls, in fact, with more, substantially more courses of stone. So a slightly different beast. I think you can see here as well the flue. And indeed, if I was to show you more pictures, the flue and the fire pit outside are very obvious. And another site NOSAS knows very well, which we in fact dug over 10 years ago now, is at Mulhike on the Black Isle. And again, we have a grain drying kiln here with a clear entrance. Bigger this time, but still with these tapering sides and multiple courses of stone. Some superficial similarities in terms of the type of stone and the construction, but also quite a few differences too. This is the Highland Folk Park at Newton Moor. And again, another kiln here, and actually a reconstruction of a kiln and a number of buildings that were excavated some years ago now, and then removed and reconstructed at the folk park. This is a 18th century design, as indeed Mulhike is. And here you can see it set within what we think most of these would have originally been in, which is a kiln barn. So this is a reconstruction of a kiln barn. The kiln sits at this end. Again, at Tarradale, we have no obvious barn. We tried very hard to make it fit in with the other remains we found and to be part of a barn potentially, but it appears just to be surrounded by clean sand and is a distinct feature on its own. Just going back a bit further in time now to a couple of medieval sites. This Steve Birch put us onto, it's actually a site he excavated in Cromarty with AOC archaeology, and this is a medieval grain drying kiln. Little bit more similar now to what we have at Tarradale, perhaps straighter walls, not quite as high. Nice cobbled surface, like the vestiges of what we think is our earlier floor potentially at Tarradale. This is actually, I think, 13th or 14th century. And this is at Bournish on South Uist. So we've actually got two phases of kiln here shown at the south of this site. This is the same site, two pictures of it, different phases of excavation. Again, this is probably 13th, 14th century. And we've actually got a stone kiln barn attached to this kiln, but the kiln barn now appears to have some similarities with what we got at Tarradale. There's an original entrance here that was with a step that was blocked up at some point, and there are other details which are at least superficially comparable with some of what we're seeing at Tarradale. This has led us to thinking that possibly this is an early feature. If not medieval, then perhaps early modern. We're thinking most likely predates the Aiken map at least, probably 17th century or earlier. That's our best guess at the moment. Interpretations, such as they are currently, these are very putative. So we're thinking original phase is a corn drying kiln, a grain drying kiln, or possibly just a barn, a circular barn, which we know did exist. Which has then been reused for something involving intense burning. That could be a lime kiln. It could just be reused for successive bonfires, although, as I've said, there is very intense burning and a lot of it here, so that's serious bonfire use. Was it some other kind of kiln altogether? Other thoughts, and this is really superficially based on the shape and the steps. Is it a well? Also at Cromarty in the medieval borough there was a circular well. Thought at least to be a circular well found in the lowest deposits there of the medieval borough. Again, high medieval, probably I think 13th, 14th century, something like that, with a set of steps leading down into it, much deeper than this, not as wide as this, but again, some superficial similarities. However, in terms of holding water, this seems to be unlikely. As I've said, it is surrounded by sand, and its position in the topography of the landscape seems to suggest that well is unlikely. It's an odd place to put it. There are other much more obvious places you would choose to site a well. We did think possibly a retting pool for flax production, but again, similar issues really with retention of water. And another fairly early thought was, do we have a kind of monumental vegetable store of a tatty pit? And we know pits were dug to store potatoes, but this is much bigger and fancier than any other example anyone knows. I mean, if you were going to use it for storage, having steps to take stuff down into the middle and all the rest of it might make sense. But I think we've largely dismissed this one. Perhaps slightly more persuasive, at least in a later phase of use, could be a smokehouse. The lack of flue would fit with a smokehouse. It doesn't need one. We could have had a fire at the bottom, and then with meat or fish hanging above, and the superstructure as it was retaining the heat. And perhaps, who knows, could have been an accidental fire and that superstructure burnt down. Just coming back to the grain drying kiln, major reservation lots of people have mentioned is about the lack of flue. But just coming back to Steve Birch again, the archaeologist, he has stated he has dug at least several prehistoric examples anyway of grain drying kilns which did not have a flue, which were flueless. There would have been some kind of grain drying platform, a screen above the floor on which the grain was placed, and then a fire below it, and the grain would stay on the screen, and the fire would go below it, and the grain would be dried and then removed. Yes, it sounds a terrible fire hazard, as I'm sure it was, but you know, these structures did exist. Another one is charcoal pit. And we do know that in the area there were pits where peat, in fact, was burnt in pits to produce a kind of charcoal, which was then used in the smithy, apparently. So this seems fancier and on a bigger scale than the examples we know of, but it would potentially explain some of the burning anyway. And options are open after that. Another possibility is to steep in the grain. So possibly grain in Hessian sacks perhaps was brought down the steps down into here to be steep in prior to germination. A few questions, some of which we've talked about at some length, some of which we haven't. So this higher floor level, scarcement, ledge, what was the purpose of that? What is the interpretation for that? Is that the original floor? As we've just discussed at length, if it's a kiln, where is the flue? Why do we have this collapse in the south wall? What happened there? Possibly it was just a tree throw. I mean, perhaps that's the most likely explanation there, just a tree fell over. What were the steps for? And indeed, are they contemporary with the original bowl? Remember, these are made out of sandstone slabs, and the walls are actually of field boulders, which suggests possibly not built at the same time. Why were the steps then blocked up? One theory on that is to make it airtight. What superstructure did it have? We've discussed some possible ideas there. Was it ever enclosed in a barn? As that example, I showed the picture of the Highland Folk Park. Again, we have no evidence for that currently, at least. And when does it date to? We do not know, but currently we're thinking earlier. It is not shown on the Aiken map. Just coming back to the big wall I started off with, our latest thinking on that is in fact a substantial boundary wall, possibly medieval, that would have been extant when Aiken was there, but he chose not to draw as it was not pertinent to his survey. His survey was for the estate, for economic use, basically, for development of the estate, and the wall and possibly features like this were not relevant to that. These were no longer of any economic value or interest from that point of view. And that's not just total surmise. Aiken did draw another map again at Cromarty, where there is a large medieval boundary wall, which he did not show on the map, but which you can still see today, and which definitely predates the map. So that is a possibility. So, as I've said, what is its relationship, if any, with the map? One feature, very different date, we think, that we have just started to have a look at is this ice house belonging to Tarradale House, probably quite a smallish affair in ice house terms, for use by the house to keep their food cold. It's only shown on the Ordnance Survey second edition map, which dates the very early 20th century. So that pretty much securely dates the ice house to probably the very late 19th century. But more on that to follow. So just remains to me to offer a few thanks to all our volunteers and helpers, Eric Grant in particular, leader of the Tarradale project, to all the excavators, especially those hardy souls who worked on the putative kiln during winter 24-25 with me. I've named some of them there. To everyone who's visited, commented, to David Newman for the drone views and the plans, to John Wombell for his work on the flotting we've done so far, and finally to Andrew Mackenzie, aka Highland Historian, who saw a Facebook post and has pledged the money for a radiocarbon date. We still need to definitely identify our best, securest sample to send off, which is going to give us the most telling result. But we will certainly be making use of that. So thank you very much for listening.